All right, so today, this is my 5th event with Meetup. And so today we're going to talk about retraining the brain for food and chemical sensitivities. So I hope everyone was expecting this topic and feels like they're in the right place. All right, so I'm going to talk, as I said, talk for about 20 or 30 minutes, then we will end the recording so we can have a discussion. Okay, so our topic today, as I said, how do we retrain the brain for food and chemical sensitivities? My name is Madeline Lowry. I am trained as a nutritional therapy practitioner. Actually had a practice that was very, I had a lot of clients that had food and chemical and other kinds of sensitivities. I did myself. And, it was through that experience that I started to explore ways to eliminate sensitivities, at my client's behest. I had tons of sensitivities myself. I never really prioritized, the idea of trying to eliminate them. I was spending all of my energy trying to avoid the things I was sensitive to and learning how to cook, in new ways with fewer ingredients, and I thought that's what was necessary to maintain my health. But it wasn't really until my clients started to push me and say, no, we don't want to have these sensitivities. How do we get rid of these? And then I really started to look into ways that we can retrain ourselves for these kinds of sensitivities, including ways of working with the brain. And that is ultimately the route that I found to be the most productive. So productive that I actually went and retrained again as a certified MAP method practitioner. And we'll talk about what that is later. But kind of along my journey, I found that basic methods of neural retraining, probably the more popular ones, the ones you've heard of, aren't always effective for people with sensitivities. And sometimes people need more. There's certain kinds of people, and we'll talk about who that is, need more. And so that is where advanced methods come in. All right. So today we're going to talk about some of these topics. I'm going to kind of run through this quickly because this is really designed to be an overview, a brief overview of the topic. But I have lots of resources that you can refer to, and we'll talk about that at the end. But we'll talk about sensitivity reactions, what causes them, the sensitivity cycle, how the subconscious mind comes into play, why having sensitivities can set us up for chronic illness, chronic symptoms, chronic health conditions, and who is the person that needs a more advanced method. I will then talk about the MAP method, again, very briefly, but this is the method that I use for advanced neural retraining, and then I will point out ways that you can learn more if this is a topic that's interesting to you. I can't, in half an hour, I can't really fully cover the subject, but just enough to, give you an overview. Okay, so sensitivity reactions, right? For the next 20 or 30 minutes, what I'd like you to do is just adopt the idea, right, that sensitivities are forms of conditioned behaviors created in the subconscious mind. This is how I understand them. And I know that's kind of a leap for a lot of people, but this is the approach, this is the perspective that I'm going to be taking throughout this presentation. So, I want you to understand that these kinds of conditioned behaviors are created in the mind, not your conscious mind, right? Not your logical thinking mind. You didn't set out to learn this behavior. This was more of a subconsciously developed pattern. And we'll talk about the subconscious mind and how that works. These are conditioned responses that are more likely to be created in someone who has a hypervigilant limbic system. The limbic system is a more primitive part of the brain, right here above in the brainstem. That is the danger sensing part of the brain. There are triggers for these conditioned behaviors, right? And you know what they are. That's why you're here, right? They are things like foods, things like chemicals, things like environmental irritants, right? That we come into contact with, and they produce a conditioned response, a certain set of symptoms or reactions. As we will see, these kinds of conditioned behaviors are reinforced by our thoughts and beliefs, learned information, and they are amplified by fear and anxiety. If these concepts are new to you, I would recommend reading the book Wired for Healing by Annie Hopper. She's the developer of one of the basic methods of neural retraining. But you can learn a lot from reading her book, right? So let's talk about the sensitivity cycle and what that looks like. So we have a sensory stimulus. This is the thing that you are sensitive to, whether it's a food, a chemical, pollen, dust, mold, whatever that is. Something that you encounter, and that limbic brain, the danger sensing part of the brain, has misidentified this as a true threat. And so it sets off an alarm. The amygdala, another part of the brain, sends off this alarm signal, right? Which calls for the stress hormones. These enter the circulation and move throughout the body. And then we experience symptoms, the symptoms that are associated with our sensitivity. This pattern may be confusing and perplexing at first, but after a while, maybe we catch on to like, oh, this happens whenever I eat that, or whenever I go there, or whenever I breathe this. And so this starts to shape our thoughts and beliefs. This thing that I'm being exposed to is really dangerous for me, right? Because it is creating these uncomfortable symptoms. And this leads to changes in our behaviors because now we are determined to avoid this thing. And so what I want you to understand that this is a self-reinforcing cycle. And fear and anxiety is the fuel that that in part is reinforcing this whole cycle, a kind of a neural circuit in the brain. And as you may have heard, Donald Hebb coined the phrase, neurons that fire together wire together. And so what we are seeing here is the creation of a neural circuit that fires and wires. And the more it fires and wires, the more hardwired it becomes. The problem with this is that every time this self-reinforcing cycle runs, it's putting us in the stress response, which is also known as fight, flight, or freeze. When we are in the stress response too much of the time, this results in something that, practitioners, you may have heard some of your practitioners talk about this, sympathetic dominance, right? So the idea is that we are spending, when we are that person that's in a sympathetic dominant state, we are spending too much time in that stress response and not enough time in the parasympathetic response, which is the rest, digest, and heal response, which is where we need to be most of the time in order to maintain our health. So let's talk about the role of the subconscious mind, right? The subconscious mind, you may have heard, is responsible for 90 to 95% of all brain activity. When we talk about our mind, we are mostly talking about our conscious mind, right? This is the part of the mind we have access to. It is the thinking, the logical, the rational part of the mind. It is the part of the mind that helps us to solve crossword puzzles and get an A in our English class. But the subconscious mind, which is relatively inaccessible to us, we often don't consider, though it is very powerful. It is 1,000,000 times more powerful than our conscious mind. This is the part of the mind that runs all the functions of our body. And always has. This is why it can create any symptom that it wants to, because it controls all the functions of the body. This is a pattern mind. It's a habit mind. It's not a thinking mind, right? So it doesn't work the same way as our conscious mind. It is a mind of associations. We talked about that danger sensing part of the mind, the limbic brain. This is a part of the brain that's tasked with monitoring our environment, both our external environment, everything that's going on around us, as well as everything that's going on within us, right? It is monitoring all of this, including our thoughts and emotions. And when it recognizes a danger pattern, it calls for that alarm, which calls for the stress hormones, which puts us into the stress response and produces the symptoms. As I said, fear is, amplifies and reinforces the whole cycle. Please also understand that conditioned behaviors are based on memories. Every behavior we have is based on memories in the subconscious mind, right? You don't have to consciously sort of filter through memories to figure out, like, how am I going to respond to this situation? How am I going to respond to this situation? Your subconscious mind is doing that automatically. The subconscious mind also has a self-healing capability. We'll talk more about this later when we talk about advanced neural retraining and how we use that. So sensitivities, you all came to this session because you wanted to learn how to retrain your brain to resolve sensitivities. But what I want you to know is that even beyond that goal, that chronic sensitivities, multiple sensitivities, ongoing sensitivities set us up for chronic illness, right? Because they put us in that sympathetic dominant state. That state that inhibits all the restorative functions of the body. So when the brain is misidentifying things in our environment and our experience, things we're being exposed to as true threats, when really they are just, irritants, like a level 1 or 2, maybe on the danger spectrum, they're misidentifying them as something like a 7, 8, 9, right? And they are calling for the immune system to attack, use all your weapons against this perceived threat. Then the immune system is being, incorrectly addressing things that are in our environment frequently. And this creates chronic inflammation in the body. We know that chronic inflammation is a precursor to many kinds of diseases and conditions. We also start to see that the immune system starts to become dysregulated, because when the immune system is being directed against threats that are present frequently, it's like staging an ongoing battle on multiple fronts every day, right? And then the things that are the true threats, things like viral or bacterial infections, things like precancerous cells, right? Things that our immune system should really be addressing kind of get put to the side. And so we find that these kinds of people have chronic, lingering viral, bacterial, parasitic kinds of infections. And, that's just a result of the immune system really expending all of its resources against these false foes. So all of this is more prevalent, more likely for someone that we call, this is really an Annie Hopper term, I believe, the susceptible individual, right? So there is a type of person for whom this is more likely to happen. Who is the susceptible individual? What I have learned, right, is that the susceptible individual is someone with a trauma history. Maybe in childhood, right? That's where we typically look, younger than 18. But for me, what I've seen is like, really, this could be at any point in life. We talked about how, this is more likely, sensitivity reactions are more likely to be established in someone who has a hypervigilant limbic system, right? Danger sensing system. And what seems to happen is that these trauma experiences from the past have kind of flipped a switch, right, in that danger sensing part of the brain, almost like there's this identification that the world is a really dangerous place, that we have to be very vigilant and careful in order to stay safe. And so this is the, these are the kind of root causes for this limbic hypervigilance. This is not a small group, right? The group of susceptible individuals, I believe, is about 25 to 30% of the population. This is supported by the ACEs studies that were done in the 1990s. If you aren't familiar with those studies, ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And this was a very large population study done by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente. You can look up the ACEs study, ACE study. It's on the CDC website. Anyway, so that study showed that people who experienced adverse childhood experiences, traumas, before the age of 18 and had a moderate level were predisposed to chronic illness and conditions for the rest of their lives. This includes emotional, mental, and physical illness, causes of early death, addictions, right? So there is a significant correlation between these. For these kinds of people, basic neural retraining methods are often not enough, right? So what are we talking about? DNRS, Dynamic Neural Retraining System, which was the system created by Annie Hopper, Gupta, others. So those methods are trying to work through the conscious mind to influence something in the subconscious mind. And for the susceptible individual, it's just not enough because there are significant blocks and barriers to you just creating a new neural pathway over an old neural pathway that you don't want anymore, right? There are more blocks and barriers that need to be dealt with at a subconscious level. And so for the susceptible individual, the ongoing stress response brought about by sensitivities, not only sensitivities, but sensitivities can be a big contributor if you have multiple sensitivities. This sets us up for chronic illness because, as I said before, too much time spent in fight or flight, too much time in that stress response leads to chronic inflammation and the inhibition of all healing functions of the body. Little things like digestion, elimination, detoxification, hormonal regulation, fluid balance, nutrient uptake, wound healing, just little things that, help you stay alive. And if you're someone who already is, behind the ball, right? If you are already someone who's struggling with your health, like you need all of these systems to be online so that you can, even maintain your health. And you really need them to be in full force if you want to recover your health. So for the susceptible individual, advanced neural retraining can really be that missing piece, right? Because we need to get to a deeper level, right? We need to heal. We need to have your subconscious mind fully process and let go of these experiences, these trauma experiences that it's kind of hooked on, that are in a dangerous place. So through a set of sessions, we can reduce this hypervigilance state. We can help to restore a state of tolerance in that limbic brain. We can reduce this sympathetic dominance that's happening. We can, change negative thoughts and beliefs. Remember the symptom cycle. There are different aspects to that. And so with advanced neural retraining, basically, we can start to work on these different aspects to break down the cycle and to allow the body to be in that parasympathetic state more of the time so that we can start to regain our health. So here's that sensitivity cycle again. So, We want to heal the traumas, calm the limbic brain so that it is less likely to form new sensitivities and can start to reestablish tolerance for the environment that we are living in. We can start to change the conditioned behaviors that arise when we're exposed to that stimulus. We can start to change these negative thoughts and beliefs, kinds of thoughts and beliefs that lead to fear of the stimulus. And we can start to replace or change these kind of avoidance behaviors. That's done through a set of incremental exposures that you control. And in doing this, as I said, we can promote the parasympathetic or the rest, digest, and heal response in the autonomic nervous system, which is essential, for maintaining and recovering our health. So the MAP method, MAP stands for Make Anything Possible. The MAP method is the method that I came across very randomly. And, it is a method that most people have never heard of. Why? Because it is less than 10 years old. Maybe it's like 7 or 8 years old. It's only been taught for maybe 5 years. There are fewer than 200 practitioners in the world, right? This is the latest energy psychology method. What do I mean by energy psychology? Well, if you've heard of EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprogramming, or if you've heard of EFT or tapping, right? Emotional freedom technique. These are the energy psychology methods from the 1980s. These have been around for a long time. It has taken decades for them to become accepted, just like it took decades for acupuncture to become accepted. But they work by trying to utilize the energy systems of the body with EFT or tapping on acupressure points, right? With EMDR, you are using bilateral stimulation, maybe, with your eyes or, some other form of bilateral stimulation in conjunction with focusing on the traumatic memory to try to clear a pattern that's been established in the subconscious mind. With the MAP method, we do not have to do this anymore. The MAP method, it works directly with the subconscious mind, and the subconscious mind can do all of this and more on its own without, the need for these, for tapping or, any kind of bilateral stimulation. These sessions are meditative, right? So this is not hypnosis. This requires that you be in a relaxed, meditative state with your eyes closed while we are working in a session. We do these sessions at a distance over Zoom video conference, much like this. And like I said before, this is a self-healing method. This is a method that taps into the subconscious mind's own ability to heal itself. The sessions are facilitated by a practitioner, but they are also framed by your intention, your goal for the session. In a session, we can heal trauma memories, we can change deeply held patterns, including behaviors and beliefs. We can neutralize old patterns and replace them with new patterns. And, I know it can be really hard to grasp how this can happen, but for example, like with a trauma memory, right, there are intense emotions around that memory. And what I want you to understand is that the subconscious mind has a kind of prioritization system, right? So the memories are prioritized according to how emotionally intense they are. The more emotionally intense a memory, the more it's held at the top of the prioritization system. And that trauma memory likely has programming associated with it, right? So, for example, a traumatic memory of public speaking may have kind of like programming, you can think of it as, around, being socially anxious, not liking to be in front of groups or having to be, having people's attention on you, being the center of attention, right? And so that if that memory is highly emotional, highly intense for you, then that programming is very impactful for you. But when we can neutralize the painful emotions around the memory, we can also deprioritize the programming that goes with it. And with MAP method, we are not working with one memory at a time, like EMDR or EFT. We are using one memory as the target, as the focus, but we are using the power of your subconscious mind to find the associated memories. And so we are neutralizing memories as a group. And so this is how this method is faster, gentler, easier than previous methods. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking here so that we can get to the Q&A. But if this has intrigued you at all, like I said, I'm going to point you to other resources because I could keep talking for a few hours here, and we don't have time for that. If you go to my website, tcneuralretraining.com, TC stands for Twin Cities, which is where I am. You can see there are videos on that page, and you can watch the videos in order. They describe the science behind the MAP method, some QEEG studies of brain activity during a MAP session where the client is receiving, just hearing verbal instructions from the practitioner. She has these, I don't know, sensors on her head, but that is not part of the MAP method, right? There's no equipment needed for a MAP session. Those sensors are there because that's how they picked up the QEEG study. That's how the study was done. That's how they could sense the brain activity. For a MAP session, all you need is a way to connect to a Zoom video conference. That is all. And then there's also a video of a demonstration session of a MAP session for a phobia. Often phobias can be resolved in one session. So that's kind of a nice one to watch and to see what happens. I also have developed free courses on the MAP method so that people can learn more, people who really want to dig into this, right? So I have 3 free courses available at mapforhealth.us. It's my second website, the platform where all of my programs and courses are. And so there's a program for, what is the MAP method and how does it work? There's a course for how do we use the MAP method for mind-body healing, which is what I specialize in. And then tips for more effective MAP sessions. And then you can also find all of the programs there as well. These are 4-week self-paced online programs for things like sensitivities. Particular to sensitivities, I do have several podcast episodes on this topic, so you might want to tune into the Flourish with Neural Retraining podcast, my podcast, and listen to episodes 30, 38, or 57, which are all about sensitivities and how we use the MAP method to address those.